Hi everyone, we're going to go over Chapter 8 in this video in Principles of Public Speaking Online here at UWA. Chapter 8 deals with language and how to choose the words that we use in our speeches. Words are very important because, again, that's the whole point. We're sending information verbally using words and language. So we want to make sure that the language that we use is the most effective and inclusive that it can be for our speeches. When we talk about language, we're talking about what we call semantics. And semantics are just how words come to have meaning. You know, we've come a long way in terms of language from cave drawings, back in prehistoric days to all the languages around the world that we have now. There's different nuances to all those languages. Some languages, the same words mean different things. Some languages don't have words for some things. So again, it's important to understand language and how that has meaning and how that can be used when you're speaking in public. But what is language? Language is just sort of a group of sounds that we use to have meaning or that we give meaning to. And again, we say one word, right? If we say apple, that sort of emulates an idea in our mind, right, of what that is, a red fruit, right, that's juicy on the inside, right? So language just gives meaning to sounds and how sounds are grouped together. So language is kind of funky and a really sort of abstract concept, but we're going to talk about how to use our language effectively in public speaking, okay? But again, using that example I used before of the apple, language is symbolic. So we say a word and we have an idea in our minds of what that word is. Okay, so apple, it's a fruit, right? An orange, it's a fruit. Those are very kind of concrete. But if I were to say the word mom, now that has a very different implication for people. For me, it's a picture of my mother who raised me, who I grew up with, who's still alive today. Some people may not have been raised by their mothers. Some people may have been raised by a mother figure who was not necessarily their biological mother. So for some people, mom can mean a grandma or an aunt or something like that. Anyone who kind of took on that role, right? Or it could be their dad, right? If there was no one in the picture like that. So that one's a little more subjective. But either way, when we say a word, we have some idea in our mind of what it is, okay? And that's what language is. It just gives meaning to words, okay? So take that in consideration. Language is powerful, and we say it's powerful because it invokes emotion and feeling. They invoke emotions and are powerful tools in society. You know, public speaking is so important because it can invoke that sense of emotion in your audience, and you want that, and you want to be able to incite change and incite positivity and change, in your words, through your words, just through something that you've said. We think of sort of powerful public speakers throughout history. One of the biggest one that comes to my mind is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. With the March on Washington, gave his I Have a Dream speech that inspired hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people during that time period. And his words had so much meaning and had so much power behind them that it did incite that change, right? And that's what public speaking can do. It can do that today. If you ever watch the news with politicians and things especially, the more powerful speakers are the ones who can get their point across the most. Okay, so again, speech is powerful. Language is powerful. Our words are powerful. Even going back to an example I've used before, we have these words or these things that we know about our friend that we could say, that would ruin their lives. We said them out loud. Then we say them out loud, and then their lives are kind of ruined, right? Your friendship is ruined. So language is powerful for a number of reasons. It can be really positive or really negative, depending on how you use those words. So choose them wisely. Language is an organization tool. Your words allow us to group things together, right? It goes back to that organization lecture that we talked about a few videos ago. It helps with understanding. It helps keep you on track and your audience on track. It helps you give a deeper understanding to someone about something. You can explain a concept to them that maybe they weren't able to get another way. And again, that's powerful. If you can explain something to them and help them understand something, that's really powerful. And language is always changing, right? We talk about slang and things like that, words that develop over time, especially with technology. and science and how things develop so quickly these days, with social media also. Language is always evolving. We're always developing new terms and new terminology for things. Emoji was not a word a few years ago. Now everyone knows what an emoji is. So again, language is always evolving and changing. We add new words yearly, if not daily, to our sort of codex of words. So again, language is always evolving. One thing with language is that we want to make sure, especially in our public speaking situations, that our language is as concrete as possible. Now, what we mean by that, by concrete, is specific. Okay, specific, narrow, and particular, and related to our senses. Okay, we want those words as opposed to what we're calling abstract words or concepts. Okay, and you've probably talked about these in some English courses and things like that. But abstract terms are more general, they're more broad, they're nonsense related, they're more sort of ideas than anything else. So one form of abstract term is love. Okay, now we all have an idea of what love is, but how do you kind of visualize love? Can you reach out and touch love? Can you hear, how do you see love? And that's one of those terms too that means different things to different people. Is it platonic love, like love between your friends that you have, your close friends? Is it the love you have for your family members, or is it the love you have for your spouse, girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever? All those are very different kinds of love, right? That's kind of an abstract term. Versus if I were to say the word heart. Okay, well, heart can be either an organ or that round thing with two round things and a point, right, that makes that heart shape. That's a lot more concrete, right? We get what that means. And depending on the context, it'll get even more concrete. But we want to be very concrete with what we say. Abstract words, again, are very general, very broad, and not necessarily related to your senses. So I'm going to give some examples of some sort of more abstract phrases. I love sports. Okay, that's very abstract, right? We don't know what sport it is. We don't know how much I love sports or anything like that. How deeply do you love sports? What sport do you really love? Are there some sports that you don't love, right? So that's a more abstract sort of general statement, okay? Here's another one. Some foods make me ill. Okay, well, is it all foods? How many foods? What kind of foods? What kind of illness? Does it make you ill like mad, or does it make you ill as in sick? Okay, again, word meanings are different there, right? So again, that's a very general kind of phrase. We don't necessarily know as much meaning as we could behind that phrase. Another one, I use drugs. That's sort of a doozy right there, right? What kind of drugs do you use? Are they illicit drugs? Are they prescription drugs? Are they over-the-counter drugs? What are they for? Again, very general statement, and we want to avoid those. And the last one, I'm a teacher. Okay, well, what kind of teacher? Are you like an education teacher? Do you teach martial arts? Are you a coach? What kind of teacher are you? Are you an art teacher? Again, what grade level do you teach? Again, very general statements, very abstract kind of statements. They're not as specific as we would like them to be. All of those four statements that I just read off are open to interpretation. And we don't necessarily want that when we're giving a speech. We want to be as clear and concrete as possible. All right, concrete. Concrete's very, stiff, and we know what it is, and sturdy, right? We want that in our speeches, okay? We can reach out and touch it almost, okay? So we do want concrete terminology and language, and that's very specific. It's narrow-minded, it's very narrow-focused, right? And that's a good thing. It's very particular. Okay, again, goes back to sort of the specificity, and it's sensory, so it's related to our senses, whereas the abstract terms aren't as much. Okay, and that'll make sense here in a second. So instead of saying I love sports, which is a very abstract concept, you would want to say I am a soccer player. Okay, period. Now that may not say explicitly the word love, but again, it shows what sport, it shows that he plays it, all right, and that through that playing, probably he loves it or really likes it, or he wouldn't be doing it, Okay, so again, it's a lot more specific than just saying I love sports. All right, he's not talking about football, he's not talking about baseball or basketball, anything like that. He's talking about soccer. Okay, so it's more specific. He's talking about him personally, all right, where his love came from. So again, it's a little more concrete and specific. Instead of saying some foods make me ill, again, which is very abstract, we'd want to say I'm allergic to peanuts. All right, two things there. We realize what food it is, okay, and what type of reaction, what kind of illness it is. Okay, it could have been something, intestinally related, or it could give you headaches, something like that. But this is an allergy, right? So we kind of can see what kind of reaction that elicits, and we know what food causes that. So again, I'm allergic to peanuts is much more specific than some foods make me ill. All right, you see the difference there? It's subtle changes, but again, it's more specific language, and we need to use that when we can. Instead of saying I use drugs, you could say I take an aspirin every day. Okay, well, aspirin is not an illicit drug. It's not cocaine, right? So we know what type of drug it is. It's an over-the-counter drug. We know how frequently it's used. Okay, so again, much more specific than just saying I use drugs. Then the last example of I'm a teacher is more concrete if you say I teach college-level communications courses, which I do. So again, it says what level you teach. It says what you teach. Okay, so again, much more specific. All right, and again, I know that's kind of an iffy little exercise, but it just shows how language can sort of be interpreted if it's left up to the abstract side. So you want to make it as clear and concise and specific as possible by using those more concrete terms. You don't want anything left up to interpretation from your audience. You want to make sure they know clearly what you're trying to say as you say it. So again, use concrete language as much as possible in your speeches. You also want to use what we're calling inclusive language. And this is sort of a bigger issue today than it ever has been. You don't want to use language that leaves out groups of people. And we think about that a lot in terms of gender. So instead of saying terms like mankind, you want to say words like humankind. Again, subtle changes mean the same thing, but again, it's not trying to leave out any people, whether it's intentional or not. Some people may take it as leaving out specific groups for whatever reason, so you want to make sure you're as inclusive as possible. Instead of man-made, you could say handmade. Instead of saying fireman, you say firefighter, or mailman, mail carrier, right? So again, you just want to make sure that you're including everyone when you speak. You're inclusive with that. And in conjunction with that, you want to make sure you're using approved names. So you want to make sure you call people what they want others to call them. You want to use the name that they want to be called, okay? And this is sort of a twofold thing. It goes in terms of gender these days, right? It's a huge deal now. You want to make sure you're using the correct pronouns for people, especially in terms of issues with transgendered people specifically. You want to make sure you're using their preferred pronouns for them. It goes in terms of courtesy titles, so out of respect, if someone has a PhD, you want to refer to them as doctor, if they want to be referred to as that. They'll want to be referred to as doctor whoever, or such and such name, comma, PhD, especially for medical doctors and things like that. If they have any other titles and they want to include those, make sure you do that on your first reference. Make sure that you're just calling them whatever they want to be called, okay? And in terms of race, it's also a big issue. Do people want to be called black or African American, okay? White or Caucasian, right? Hispanic versus Latina, those are different things, okay? So make sure you're using those correctly. If they're Asian, that's sort of a blanket term. Are they specifically Chinese? Are they Indian? Are they Japanese? If they are Indian, are they Indian from India, or are they American Indians? Okay, and if that's the case, so they want to be called Native Americans, right? So again, it's sort of a jumbled up mess, but you want to make sure that you're calling people the most respectful title that you can. You want to call them what they want to be called, or what they call themselves, because that's how they want to be referred to. All right, so again, you'll know that about your subject matter and your topic, so make sure you're using those that sort of insight when you are using people's names. And in terms of titles, pronouns, courtesy titles, that kind of thing, just make sure you're using all that correctly. All right? Some tips that you can use in terms of using language. You want to avoid exaggerations, okay? And what I mean by that is you don't want to be careless. If you were to say, well, that was just the biggest mess I've ever seen, okay, in describing, someone's, messy bedroom or something. Well, was that actually true? Was that actually the biggest mess you've ever seen? Have you ever seen a traffic jam at 5 p.m. on an interstate? That's a huge mess, right, after an accident or something. So don't over-exaggerate. It's okay to add some flair, but don't over-exaggerate what you say, because again, it kind of shows, and you don't want to have that sort of exaggeration show. At the same time, you don't want to oversimplify a difficult concept, okay, because that can seem unrealistic. So if you're talking to a group of people trying to lose weight, you don't want to tell them that, you can lose 50 pounds just by doing this and this, right? There's probably a lot more to it than just eating, taking this pill and drinking, 16 ounces of water with that pill, right? There's a lot more to it than that, and it requires diet and exercise and lifestyle change in some aspects. So you don't want to oversimplify and make, seemingly false claims, because again, your audience will see through that. Okay, so keep that in mind. Another tip is that your language reveals your perspective, so choose carefully. You want to make sure that what you're saying reflects your point of view and reflects your standpoint on whatever your topic is, okay? And I'll give you an example of this that we had recently. We had a professor here giving us a talk at an event, and everyone in the audience, including myself, thought, based on the way she started off her speech, that she was not in favor of this particular idea at all. Just given the way she was talking about it, her tone of voice, her information that she was presenting. Then all of a sudden, at the very end, her tone completely changed, and it turns out that she was very in support of that particular topic and idea. And we were all sort of stunned, because it didn't seem that she was in favor of it at all in the beginning. So her wording and her choices were not necessarily reflective of her overall standpoint. You want to make that clear from the get-go. You want to make sure that the audience understands. It says, yes, this is what I'm here to talk about. Yes, I'm in support of this, or no, I'm not in support of this. I believe this, or I don't believe this. You want to make that clear right away. Otherwise, you'll end up like me and the rest of the audience in that situation, confused, right? You'll leave the audience confused and wondering, what you're even talking about, okay? So make sure your standpoint is clear, and make sure that your standpoint is reflected in your language, okay? Don't let anything come across as falsely portraying your beliefs, all right? So make that clear from the get-go. Other, short tips: use language as appropriate for your audience. Think about the formality of the situation. I'm talking very differently with you guys than I would probably to some of my supervisors, right? Just because the formality level is different. Think about it in terms of your audience, okay? Think about the language that your audience can understand. You don't want to talk above them, because again, if you talk above them, they're not going to understand what you say. Conversely, if you talk beneath them, they're going to get bored and not listen to you. So again, just make that clear to your audience that you're on the same page and on the same level, all right? Be ethical. Again, we say that sort of every week in every one of these videos, but you want to be ethical. Make sure you're using ethical language and logical, sound arguments and information when you speak. Best rule of thumb is just choose language that you would normally use. This is how I normally speak to my coworkers, to my friends. So again, this is sort of effective and works for this situation. Best rule of thumb is just sort of talk the way you normally talk. Don't try to amp it up any. Don't try to add a lot of flair. Just talk. You want it to be conversational. You want it to seem organic and fluent and relatable to your audience. So just make it as normal and natural as you can as you go, because again, that helps your audience feel at ease. It helps you feel at ease because you're not focusing too much on the way you're speaking. You're more focused on the content, which is, again, why they're there. So language can be useful. It can also be detrimental. So make sure that you're using language as effectively as possible when you're speaking. And you should be good to go. Again, these notes are posted on Blackboard, so give these a look over. Make sure you read over Chapter 8 in your textbook. Chapter 7, 8, and 9 will be your next quiz chapter after the 4, 5, and 6 quiz. So again, keep that in mind, and I'll post that quiz soon, so be on the lookout. Thanks.